So one of the questions there is about what I talked about on Sunday about not feeling free.
They were writing a pile of questions.
Oh yeah.
Is that meant to be for you?
We're live.
Are we actually?
We are live.
Right. You do the intro.
Okay.
Yes. Refresh ourselves.
Guys, okay, we can't shout into the mic because the mics will pick up. So I have to speak to myself. Don't shout. Don't.
Hey!
Yay!
Are you joining us?
Oh, I was going to say hi.
Just come join us if you want to.
What are we doing?
We're doing live lunch.
We're doing live
Hey!
lunch.
Literally like that.
We are literally live right now.
Hi!
My boss is being such a pain. I have to go. I don't know what to do.
Crazy start to live lunch. Welcome back to live lunch.
Live lunch, not
This-
live brunch. This is so good. Like we are back at lunchtime and actually have
We're
food.
live.
Are you more of a lunch
There's
person than
lunch.
I
We
never have brunch.
are back here at our old studio with some new artwork on the wall. Season 10. Welcome to season 10 of
Season
live
10.
live lunch.
How many
episode
grey hairs did
1.
you have when we did season 1?
The answer is 0. I have 0 hairs. Yes.
The journey we've been on.
I did watch the last episode we did pre-pandemic, Joel talking about how we should make the most of the pandemic that we were heading into, which was like 18 months ago, and here we are back with the yellow table, the gold light, the gold mics, food,
Yes.
Good time.
yeah, and Instagram, and all 5 of you are so welcome to be with us. So we, if you're new to live lunch is we unpack some of the stuff that was said on Sunday in our sermon. We're in a new preaching series called Your People, just looking at some of the nitty gritty relationships that we have. If you might remember, we did relational wisdom a few months ago, and this in some ways is the sequel to relational wisdom. Relational wisdom, we looked at some of the foundations, of the principles of relationships, and here we're looking at the nitty gritties. And I'm joined by the wonderful Matt Cobb. So Matt Cobb and me will be hosting live lunch.
Yeah,
going
let's do it
forward,
together.
Which is really exciting.
Dream team,
It
right
is.
here.
Thank you. I look forward to. I've known Matt for many years.
Too long.
Too long.
Too long.
And now we are doing our live lunch together.
Yeah.
And we are joined by the wonderful Jess Kaloki.
Hello.
Jess leads our student team, but she also runs many businesses, has her
Many.
own entrepreneurial staff, and just does a lot of stuff. Got
I do a lot of bits and
fingers in
bobs.
lots of pies.
Yeah.
Cubs, anything to say? Whilst I tuck into, we've got food from the wonderful Box Shop. We've got chicken wings and tenders. Our favorites.
Yes.
They do a really good vegan option as well, so check it out. Box Shop. Shout out to Box Shop.
So it's a
Even
box
though
shop.
I paid for this. But, yeah.
Well, you're still bigging up their food,
Yeah.
which is still
We'll
good.
appreciate
free
that.
publicity.
Yeah.
There we go. So yeah, shall I launch in terms of what we talked about on Sunday? Maybe get the ball rolling for our conversation today. As Yo said, the new series, Your People, different relationships that we have in our life, from home life, social life, work life, and work is where we really started. And we talked about your boss. I picked a passage from 1 Peter chapter 2. And it was really coming from a place of the passage really talked about honouring those in authority, which is something I think culturally we find very difficult to do, or it's not like the instinct. I think if anyone, if you, like you've been in any workplace, the instinct is to be bitter and gossip about the management. That is just what happens. That I think especially British people are good at doing that. We're well practiced.
Yes.
In that is the general attitude. Maybe other cultures, other different parts of the world might be slightly different, maybe the same. But so this goes again. This is a very countercultural thing to place to start from. But also what we see in this passage is Jesus and how that Jesus responded to authorities with honor and respect and didn't create a big revolution against the Roman Empire and like that, but actually endured suffering even at the hands of authorities. But how did he do that? And also the passage talked about how he was free, a sense of peace and security, and we don't feel that often. What I talked about Sunday is whether we have a good boss or a bad boss, and hopefully we'll have an experience of a good boss as well as a bad boss. But even though the best bosses, we kind of feel we want to impress them, we want to please them, we want to get in their good books or whatever, and we can even feel trapped by that. But actually, where the message landed was about finding in Jesus the affirmation that comes from God, having a relationship with God that goes above. He is the highest authority, but actually what we receive from him through Christ is grace. Grace and affirmation. And when we have that, that is a secure foundation that we can go into the workplace, and actually it doesn't, we can be treated well or treated badly, but actually what's helping us to endure that is the affirmation from God, the love of Christ, even the security, even if things go terribly, that even if we lose our job or even if we do suffer, actually God is working his purposes out, and that's a great encouragement. That gives us stability, that helps us to navigate through. So yeah, that was what Sunday's about.
Brilliant. We also in our small group term. So our small groups kickstart this week. If you're part of the Emmanuel community, and we strongly encourage you to get stuck into a small group. They are wonderful opportunities to connect with people, and quite often the small groups are built around talking about the preach and unpacking the sermon and stuff that we've heard. And it's just a good place to work out some of your thoughts, and I've been blessed a lot by being in a small group. I'm doing Alpha this term, which is exciting, looking forward to it. Are you leading a small group?
I am an Alpha as well.
Oh, great.
I'll see you there.
Matt Cobb's doing
Well, I'm involved with the sort of pastoral side of the church, and we are sort of doing some refresher small group for all the people involved in pastoral who, over the last 18 months, it's not been easy to, because we haven't been able to get to people. We've been all stuck in our houses, that sort of thing. So just kind of refreshing, re-envisioning them for the term ahead and that sort of thing.
But you got some questions?
Yeah, so questions off the back of Sunday. Firstly, I mean, I just be good for groups to just talk about their experience. What bosses have you had? What authorities related to? Good bosses, bad bosses? What's your experience been? And then secondly, getting into that thing of when we bring as we all do, our insecurities in the workplace, and that's where the question, am I good enough? Can I be trusted? That's why what our boss says to us, or the way that we're treated by them, can be so loaded and can have such a big impact on us, is because we have those questions in us. So what is that? How has that played out for you? Does that resonate with you? Are you like, no, I'm fine. Don't take it personally at all, anything my boss says? Or has there been an example of where someone, a boss has said something that's devastated you, what's your experience of that? And then just get into, I talked even just then about the gospel brings us some peace and security, but what does that actually look like? It's easy to agree, oh yes it does, but then we go into a workplace and we feel stressed. So how can we help one another? How can we actually live in the good of that day to day? Because it's not just something that we know and it happens. Yeah. Like Christians, we do feel stressed sometimes. We do feel we have bosses that are difficult to navigate. But how can we help one another to actually live in the gospel? That's brilliant. Question.
And if you can stand back some of that I'd love to hear from both of you is, why do you think that our boss's words can have such a strong hold over our lives, where a negative word can just almost lead to quite strong anxiety and depression, and just really strong feelings of inadequacy, and almost like your identity feels like it's being challenged. And it in some ways they're just an individual who's with some amount of authority over your life and who said something, and it can just send you into a spiral. I can say that from experience. And how do we fight that? How do we overcome that?
Jess, you want to say anything on that?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I'm just such a people pleaser at heart. And that is so difficult for me, and I'm sure lots of people can relate to that at home. And I want to do the best by everybody. I want to look good in everybody's eyes. I want some form of approval. That is the fleshly heart is speaking. And just like you were saying, there's such a difference that Jesus makes when he affirms us. But in terms of how our boss views us and why that is so precious, I think it's just, I want to make sure that I'm good at this. And also, maybe there's slightly a part of it that's also financially twisted in there. Maybe money has some form of power over us as well. They're paying my bills, so I have to do well by them. I have to stick this out because I have to fund myself. And maybe there's some form of security that can get linked up in there as well, I would say. Yeah.
I think it's good to
good chicken.
That's the navigating of live lunch. But you don't actually ever, even as a Christian, even when you've been a Christian for years, you don't ever graduate from that. Yeah. I think with all of us, elder in the church, we're still prone. I'm still prone to want to please people. People's opinions matter more to me than they should do. and that sort of thing. So I think it's that constant being aware of that and being real about that and not pretending that that's not an issue. So it's easy to, you can feel that when you're just starting out in your workplace or whatever, and you think, well, I'm just at the bottom of the ladder, so it feels like this. But, there's plenty of people that are at top of the organisation that are also insecure and want to people please, and and the gospel helps us whatever level we're at, and but church pastors need that too.
I think it's a more timely question with the pandemic and with us working from home quite a bit and a lot of conversations and meetings happening virtually. We miss those connections, those physical connections that we have with people. And I think that does take a bit of a toll on people, especially during moments of conflict.
Yeah.
So I know, for instance, that if there's a moment of conflict between me and a boss or me and another senior team member, I find it a lot easier to have those conversations in person when I'm with them, and just resolve some of that tension or release some of that tension, even if it's just me expressing what my feelings are on that situation. It's not quite the same when you do that online, and I think especially for people who a lot of their work is remote or is virtual, there's very, very minimal in-person conversations. Sometimes those in-person moments are so limited that you don't really want to spend time resolving conflict. You need to make the most of those moments. What would you say to people in that situation?
Who are working from home, or who don't have that FaceTime?
With their boss to resolve conflict, or just feeling the tension of there's a relational gap because we haven't met physically. Yeah,
I think that's really tough, and I think that's really hard. And I think company. I mean, what we're seeing is certain companies saying who have gone like all in on everyone's going to work from home. Yeah, we can get the work done, and I think what we're even seeing now is in the short term that's okay, but then as you say, when the problems start to resolving problems, that sort of thing is not as easy to do remotely. So I mean, one thing I would say, and I would say this for someone in the church or someone who's not in the church, is that because these the way that someone in authority or boss speak to us can have that big impact on us, but it can feel much bigger than it actually is. And I think even talking it out, I think sometimes people can feel very stressed, and part of the reason is because it's just going around your head. And all of us have this. Someone says something and that comment just gets lodged in your head, and the more it goes around your head, the bigger it kind of gets.
100%.
But it doesn't have to. And I think even talking it out, even having people, having friends, having someone in your household that you can just, and this is for, and probably need to say this to people like me who are introverted more, because probably extroverts will, want to get this out as quickly as possible. Introverts don't. You internalize it, and then you live with that stress for ages, and actually speak. And it doesn't have to be someone who is, knows anything about it. No, it doesn't have to be someone in the workplace. Just say, this is what they said, this is how I felt, this is just getting it out. Because all the way through this preaching series, we are relational beings. We're not meant to live alone. So if you are in a situation that you are potentially isolated, what is your support network? Are you seeing people in person? Are you talking about this stuff that's going around your head? Because we need that outlet.
Brilliant. I guess next question is for you, Jess. Is you do work as a part of a team, but as I said, you've got lots of different jobs and things going on. And I know you also run your own business, and you're a video editor and creative in our city, doing stuff for people all around the world. In some ways, how does the stuff that we've talked about work for you? And I'm guessing there's lots of people within our audience who don't work within teams, who probably are entrepreneurs, who are self-employed, sole traders, musicians, artists, creatives, just doing their own thing. I guess, where do you get to outwork some of the principles that we've just talked about in terms of honoring authority and those relationships? What's the context for you?
So I've only started doing freelance work maybe over the past 6 months or so quite new to the game. But the biggest thing that I found so different was there's no one telling me what to do. And I know in this society, like you were saying, it's like, oh, being told what to do, oh, I hate my boss, whatever, and that's so normal. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'm living the dream on the other side because I've got my freelance. And then it's like, actually, no, it's so hard as well. I had to figure out how to set boundaries for myself, how to communicate what was right and wrong in my eyes, because I'm my own boss for the first time, which was really strange. So almost to maybe be like, oh, I love my bosses, I'm so grateful for them because they guide me, they lead me. But in terms of relationally, how I go about working with the people that I do, so the way my business works is it's mainly through messaging that inquiries come through. And for the first couple of months that I started it, I just felt so disengaged with people. Like, I was like, okay, great, I can provide a service, I can provide a job, but I was like, well, I just want to get to know people. I want to just like hear where they're at, what they're doing. And I know not all businesses get the privilege of doing that, but my first thing that I wanted to resolve a couple of months in was I just want to have like Zoom calls with people. So I started like scheduling. I'm like, I know we've got business, but if you've got time, I'd love to just hear your story and more about you. And we had Zoom calls and things, and that was a great place to speak about resolutions to difficulties that I had that I just got so frustrated with trying to respond to an email with saying, would you mind doing this, or could you communicate that better, or whatever. Just having that, I know not face to face, but definitely closer to face Zoom calls were so much more beneficial.
Carl, is there anything you want to like unpack? Or
Well, some questions have come. We asked some. Always invite people to ask the questions about these these topics, and so some questions have just come through. Maybe you might want to have a think about this one. One question: how do we relate to peers, co-workers when we don't share the same attitude to authority or to submitting to authority? I know you've worked in a church environment. You've also worked in not a Christian environment, that sort of thing. And I guess what I've been asking the people to do on Sunday is like, you can be different in the workplace. You don't have to engage in the gossip. You have a different attitude to authority. But that's not easy to do when everyone else, if you're the one, it's like you can come across judgmental, or you come across as holier than thou in terms of that sort of thing. When
I think it's a really tricky one. I guess you got to know yourself, and so a lot of these principles, a lot of the things that I would do are because I know myself, and I know that I can give into peer pressure quite easily and just get enjoy having a laugh and go with the flow. So I used to be quite careful about what context I put myself in.
Okay.
And I knew if there was a group of peers who were disgruntled with our boss, or I can see the situation in my mind. Is I would be. So I knew if we went out drinking, then as the drinks flowed, the conversation loosened, and it just became really not great. So I wouldn't personally. I know some others would, because they're better at it than I am. I wouldn't go out as much socially with people, or I would like leave once I knew I think this conversation probably could get nowhere. And I remember when I became a new Christian, right, I used to go. I still drank and did a bit of drugs, and I used to be with people and have conversations after a few beers or after a joint, and you know that, wait a second, this conversation is going nowhere. I didn't see anybody saved in that period. I don't think, I felt like I was being really Christian and sharing the stuff that I was learning, but it just didn't go anywhere. And I think that's what I would do. I wouldn't put myself in a context like that anymore. I think that you get loads of opportunities to live the Christian life and you show your integrity, even with the way you speak and with the way you honor. But yeah, for me personally, I think just choosing the right context that for yourself personally is where you would thrive. And sometimes being like, I'm really sorry, I need to go home now. I've got kids. And it's getting out.
They're always a good excuse.
Getting out of situations where you just know there's nothing that's going to come out of there.
I mean that's it, because Christ calls us to be in the world, not of the world, and that looks really good on paper. It's like working out and I think we do learn by sort of making mistakes, and sometimes wanting to to be in an environment and wanting to be salt and light or be a light in that thing, and realizing actually is this fruitful? Is this helpful? Is it helpful to me? Is it helpful to them?
Yeah.
But there will be other contexts where it is right to go and be there, and actually you can be a positive influence on people rather than rather than it go the other way. But that is a good question. Another question that came in, and I guess touched on it slightly on Sunday: how do we decide when a boss's behaviour needs to be called out, or when to choose to honour them, like Peter? And this is a real tension that gets right at the heart of this passage, and I think because this I said on Sunday, this passage from Peter, he's kind of saying honouring authority without caveat. He doesn't say if they're good, honour them. If they're not, do whatever. Yeah. Now, I think probably what I would also want to say, and maybe didn't say in the message, is that this is one thing that the Bible says about authority, is not the whole thing. Sure. And I think that's with this topical series. We're just doing half an hour, 25-minute message on something, but we can't say everything that the Bible says on it. And elsewhere, there's definitely principles and teaching in the Bible that definitely, we can't go along with what is evil. We can just pretend it's okay. Yeah, and to like this honoring authority doesn't, that doesn't go on. What I'm trying to say, that's not more important than other things that Christ said about following him and doing what is right and loving and that sort of thing. So if your boss is telling you to do something that is like immoral, like this, you can't apply as, well, I just have to do it because that's what is in the Bible. It's like, no, the Bible also says honor God. And as I said on Sunday, he is the highest authority. But navigating that, like, well, when can I, if someone's asked me to do something that is like, is this wrong to do it, or is it like, it can be, I don't know, you got any thoughts on that? It is not an easy thing to put into practice.
Yeah, I think the thing that comes to mind, we chatted about this briefly before we jumped into the conversation, but maybe now's the time to unpick it, is the whole Sarah and Rob terrible story that's been in the news again recently with Wayne Cousin's being sentenced to life in jail. And on one hand, you've got the police force, and praise God, my interaction with the police has only been positive. But the authority of the police have been called into question. Yeah. And I think there's, on one hand, we want to trust in the fairness and the justice of the police force, and on the other hand, we've seen it being horribly abused. And as you said, the story that's being told is a story of abuse of that authority. Yeah. Well, I guess what would you say to people who are holding those two in like what do we do with this situation? Is it there's one message that says tear down the institution, and there's like, well, a lot of police officers are saying not all police officers are like that. What would you say to people who are just like wrestling with this tension at the moment?
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, isn't it? And I imagine, just so as well, I mean, Jess, you could probably speak more than I can, but I think that incident, which is absolutely horrific and horrible, is actually, but it plays into a bigger narrative of it, and I think it's a generational thing as well, in terms of, I mean, every generation, you go back to 1960, whatever, anti-authority is a generational thing, but I think Me Too, I think Black Lives Matter, I think all these movements, all the conversation has very much has an anti-authority aspect to it. I don't know if you would say your people that you speak to, the students that you work with, that sort of thing, they're coming from that perspective, I imagine, aren't they?
I guess my part from it would be like, it just shows that people on this earth are corrupt and not perfect. It shows us that we cannot be perfect authority, whether we're in a boss position, whether we're in the receiving position. We are broken people, and through incidents like this, it's very, very clear to us. It's showing us even more reason how God is perfect and He is the greatest authority. Not just that He's the greatest authority, but He's a just God as well, and He cares about these things. He cares about justice. And I would just say, from a response of, give your feelings to God, cry out to God, tell Him, this is not right, this is not just, Lord, something needs to be done here. And with prayer also comes action, but with this action it comes from God. How would you respond? How would you be loving in this situation? And it's not crying out saying I hate these people or whatever necessarily, but God, how would you respond in love? Not to be silent about it, but also not to be like immoral, like you were saying, and not loving. So yeah.
I think because one of the responses that comes from it is, well, it's I mean, a lot of the talk is about institutional. This is, it's institutional corruption, institutional racism, institutional abuse of power, and what's which side do we go on? Is it institutional or is it bad apples? That's often the way the conversation goes, and like, what is a Christian response to that? And I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think because in one sense the gospel. One says the gospel says both. If to understand life through the lens of the gospel talks about sin, that everyone is corrupted with sin. Humanity, that is. So if you want to say is that institutional or widespread or implicit or inherent evil, badness, corruption in people, that's part of the gospel. Yeah, it does. We are all. Whether you're part of the police force, whether you're part of a corporation, whether you're part of the church, and that's another thing, abuse in the church, and that's it's like, and you can say, well, the Bible, the gospel doesn't have to say anything, have anything to say about that. It's like, well, no, actually, one of the things that the gospel does say is that we are sinful. There is repentance needed. So in one sense, if we're talking about that conversation, the Christian can affirm that widespread corruption and sin and say yes. So as a Christian approaching that, it's like I'm always affirming, yeah, it is really bad, but I can also come with a response of but there is hope, because that's not the end of the story. Because if you only have that, the solution has to be, or just try and tear down everything that's evil, and then you just end up tearing down everything because there's evil everywhere. And that it's not like that. It's not productive. It doesn't get you anywhere. It's a reaction, but it's not going to build anywhere. And in one sense, without the gospel, we don't have much of a solution. We have anger, and that's justified anger. We have hurt and pain, and justified hurt and pain. But then what do we do with it? Where do we go with it? And I think with the gospel, as you were saying there, Jess, it's like we also have hope that people can be healed, people can be transformed. Both the abused and the abuser can find Jesus and know grace that brings forgiveness, grace that brings reconciliation, but also just grace that brings comfort and healing. And then many people in our church have been, and even now are being hurt and abused, but they're finding grace from Jesus and finding love from him and that sort of thing. I could talk all day. We probably have to finish.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this powerful first episode back with Live Lunch. We hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you so much for being with us, Jess.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
You next week.
Good
next
fun.
Sunday we're looking at your friends.
Theme of friendship. Yeah, I think Joel actually is speaking on that one. So
many friends.
Hope we can. Do you want to see it for Live Lunch?
Great. Thanks for joining us. See you later.
See you soon.
Bye
Bye.